Come be a part of Doc Holliday's Rock-Splitting Politics with your host, Dr. Ed Holliday. Hear the voices of liberty speaking all across America. Doc Holliday provides thought-provoking interviews and commentary about the issues and actions that are afflicting this country and what we need to do to get America back on track. Get fired up, get inspired, get on board with Doc Holliday's Rock-Splitting Politics right now.
And here we go.
And for the first time in the month of February 2019, that's the sound of rock cracking. You've got Doc Holliday's Rock-Splitting Politics. I'm your host, Dr. Ed Holliday, and you're listening to us right here on webtalkradio.net. And wow, the economy is kicking it. The numbers came in last Friday, and 304,000 new jobs created. The liberals don't know what to do. I think they're praying for a recession. I think they are begging for a recession. The leftists want a recession so that capitalism does not work and Trump doesn't know what he's doing. But guess what? Capitalism does work. President Trump does know what he's doing. And by golly, it's a good time to be an American looking for a job. And on this week's show, we're going to be talking about what else but walls. And why do we need to talk about walls? There is a wall in Israel, and people talk about that. A wall that's between the ancient boundaries of Judea and Samaria, which we call the West Bank. But someone knows more about that wall. But they also have a southern wall built in Israel between Egypt and Israel. There's a reason why. And there was a former mayor of Shiloh, Israel. He's been on our show before. But he went on Tucker Carlson Show. President Trump tweeted his words. We'll play that tweet for you in just a minute. And before we start in today's show, I'll tell you, David Rubin was on Tucker Carlson. We're going to call him up for today's show, and we're going to talk to him about the walls and why President Trump used his comments in one of his tweets. And not only that, but before we get to that, we've got to talk about a little bit about the Democratic side and the independent side of the 2020 election. Let's do that first, and then we're going to talk about the walls and go to our interview with David Rubin, former mayor of Shiloh, Israel. We'll get to that, but let me tell you, there is an independent thinking about running for president. Have you heard Howard Schultz? Does that name sound familiar? Not a household word, but he is the former CEO of Starbucks. He is a billionaire. Over how much? I don't know. But he is a billionaire, and he wants to run as an independent because he can't stand the Democrats and he can't stand the Republicans. He's always been a Democrat, and guess what? It is driving the Democrats crazy, folks. They remember 1992. The Democrats loved Ross Perot. Now, some of you may not be old enough to remember 1992. I was there, and I remember, and Perot was in, and then he was out as a little, you didn't know if he was a crazy person or if he just didn't like President Bush, and he wanted to make sure Bush got beat. And it diluted the vote. He got 19% of the vote as a third-party candidate. And that was hard to do, and probably the best of any third-party candidate in modern times. But now if Howard Schultz goes in, he is a Democrat, but he's more of a moderate Democrat, and it is driving Democrats crazy because they'll say he'll split the vote and they'll just reelect Donald Trump. But Howard Schultz thinks not. And he's been going on shows, and he's not declaring his candidacy, but he wants to run in all 50 states, says every county in the nation he would like to run in. And you know what? I think he should run. Do I say that as a conservative? Well, when you look at what the far left is pitching, and we got all these candidates, and we'll do a show on all the 2020 Democratic candidates running for president, but you got Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, the new congresswoman out of New York. Now, she's not running for president because she's not old enough. I think she would run if she was old enough because she's got the star power right now. But when she starts making comments of 70% tax rates, and we had another new congresswoman from Minnesota saying we should have 90% tax rates on the super rich. Well, you just need to have Larry Kudlow explain it. But capitalism works, folks, because people can work hard, and the harder they work, the more money they can make. If you take incentive to work, they'll go, oh, well, I ought to just work for free. Well, no, this is capitalism. And that's why Howard Schultz is thinking about running for president, because he says he loves his country. I think he does. But he does have a chance because these far left radicals are taking over the Democratic Party, and some of the Democrats and the blue-collar workers who've been voting for even Barack Obama, they've about decided maybe the Democratic Party has left them like they've left so many people. That's what Ronald Reagan said. The Democratic Party, I didn't leave it. It left me. And that is a lot of people's thinking right now, especially with the party surging further to the left every day. Socialism, democratic socialist. It's the Democratic Party of old is gone, and it's basically a socialist party. It's the left-wingers going crazy. And so I would say former CEO Howard Schultz, get in the race. Just jump in there. And he ought to run as a Democrat. I'll tell him that. But he knows he won't have a chance to win because he has common sense ideals compared to the radical left. Now, saying all that, today's show, we got an exciting show because we got David Rubin on. He was on Tucker Carlson. But evidently, President Trump was listening to the Tucker Carlson show, or somebody showed it to him, and he used part of David Rubin's quote in a tweet about why we should have a wall. In fact, let me play that tweet first, and then I'll play that clip from Fox News, Tucker Carlson with David Rubin.
It's not a negotiation. No wall.
It's a wall between reality and his constituents.
Just factually incorrect. It's not going to work.
In 2017, there was not one illegal immigrant that made it through the southern border into Israel.
Maybe I can show you the border right along here. This is the international boundary. It's not safe here. The border's not secure. Bad guys are coming across. They can be vicious. Welcome to Mexico.
Well, that was a tweet. You got to hear the sound, but it's a video tweet that President Trump sent out, and I got a link to that right on the front page describing this week's show. And also I got a link to the Tucker Carlson interview. I think it's a 4-minute or so interview with David Rubin. Let's hear that, and then we're going to get David Rubin himself right here on Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics.
A short time ago, we spoke to David Rubin. He's the former mayor of Shiloh, Israel. He's the author of the book Trump and the Jews. We had a fascinating conversation. Listen. Mr. Rubin, thank you very much for joining us. There's a debate in the United States, as you're fully aware, over whether to erect a wall on our southern border to solve what is an immigration crisis. Israel has relevant experience with this exact topic. Will you explain what Israel did in response to its immigration crisis and the effect that the wall had on it?
Well, we certainly do have that experience, Tucker. Between 2010 and 2012, there were 55,000 illegal immigrants into Israel. Now, you have to understand, Israel is a tiny country, so 55,000 illegal immigrants in just a couple of years is a lot of illegal immigrants.
Yeah.
And most of them settled in southern Tel Aviv, which was already a working class or a little bit run-down area. The rapes and murders in southern Tel Aviv skyrocketed in those few years. The Israeli government, under pressure from the grassroots mainly, grassroots protests from the residents of South Tel Aviv and other towns that were being overrun by these illegal immigrants, the Israeli government made a decision that they were going to build a wall, a high-tech steel wall on the southern border, the border between Egypt and Israel.
Well, what about that border wall between Egypt and Israel? Well, we're going to talk to David Rubin ourselves. Tucker Carlson had a good interview, and you can go on that link that we got on describing this week's show. But listen to the best interview. That's Doc Holliday's interview, because we're going to spend the second half of this show speaking of David Rubin. Let him better explain there's two walls, and as much as I know and try to keep up with politics and keep up with world events, and I've been to Jerusalem. You know, we did a show, Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics. We did a show from Jerusalem, and I never knew there was a fence that had to be built on the southern border between Israel and Egypt. But we'll ask David about that, and we're going to find out about that. And President Trump was glad to find out about it, and everybody in America should be glad. Even our Democratic friends who want to protect our country ought to be glad that we see that walls will work. Now, if Nancy Pelosi, out of her putting politics above the safety and the effectiveness of our law enforcement in America, she's putting politics above country. Politics is, she doesn't care about the people who are going to die from illegal immigrants who are criminals coming in. Now, every illegal immigrant is not a criminal, but if she really wants the Democratic Party to be the party for women, then why? You remember, we know by facts that 31%, almost a third of every woman and young teenage girl coming in to the country, the illegal entryway, almost a third of them are being raped or sexually abused in some way. It's horrible. And yet, until there's a wall and we stop this mass illegal immigration, there's going to continue to be women being molested, assaulted. And why don't the Democrats care about those women and what's happening with them being sex trafficked across America? Now, let's get ready to listen to David Rubin. He is the former mayor of Shiloh, Israel. We've had him on our show before. It's been a while, but it'll be good to have him back on. And also, let me remind you, you're listening to Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics right here on webtalkradio.net. That's webtalkradio.net. And I'm so glad that we got some new listeners. Some of you may be tuning in for the first time to listen to this interview with David Rubin, because it's a great interview after he's made the news, made the headlines across the nation with Donald Trump's tweet. And I'm telling you, this is something I did not know, and I'm so glad that he's going to be talking to us right here. Before I get him on the phone, let me remind you, we got a website. It's called www.docholliday.org, and that's holiday of two L's. And there we got a book. I say we because I wrote a book called Bedrock Truth, talking about the Judeo-Christian foundations. And David Rubin knows about those well. I do have to say, on our book, Bedrock Truth, is written by me, is written by Dr. Alveda King. That's the niece of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Dr. Alex McFarland. And I was talking about, we want to do a show about the word racism and the background of it. And a lot of these things that Dr. Alveda King has been teaching me over the years. And we've talked about this. And I noticed she was on Fox News, Laura Ingraham show just last week, and talking about, and she made a comment that we're not different races. We're one race, one blood. And so those are the things I want to put into a special show, and I've been working on it, and we're going to hopefully have that up soon, one of these weeks. Keep listening to us. We're going to get it up there. But right now, on the phone. Well, listeners, we got this week with us David Rubin. He's the author of Trump and the Jews. He does live in Israel. He's the former mayor of Shiloh, Israel. And welcome to Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics, David.
Well, thank you, Doc. Good to be with you.
Well, it's great to have someone like you with your wisdom and intelligence of what's going on, not just in Israel, but around the world. Tell me, first off, I want our listeners to know, why did you write the book, Trump and the Jews?
Well, Doc, when President Trump was elected, and even before he was elected, there was so much hostility coming from the more liberal circles,
Right.
And just name calling and just refusal to address any issues that he was discussing, which I felt were legitimate issues. And unfortunately, some of that criticism was coming from the American Jewish community, or at least portions thereof. And I felt that the real story needs to be explored, and the real story needs to be told about Donald Trump. So I started to research the book, and I researched my book, Trump and the Jews, for the first 2 years of his presidency, and it just came out a couple of months ago.
Well, that's why I was about to ask you how recently it came out. And so it is just right off the press, and you got the latest information in there.
Yeah, I felt that it was very important to speak about all of the issues. Now, President Trump has done certain things that no other president had the courage to do.
Right.
And from my research, I came to the conclusion that it's because he is an out-of-the-box person. You know, it's the out-of-the-box factor that makes a lot of people feel uncomfortable, even conservatives. But the fact is that it took a crazy New Yorker, and I say that, with quotes.
Right.
It took a crazy New Yorker to move the American embassy to Jerusalem, and it took a crazy New Yorker to go ahead and just do away with the Iran nuclear deal, or at least the American participation in that deal.
Right.
And yes, it took an out-of-the-box person who's not afraid to do what's right, to go ahead and close down the PLO embassy in Jerusalem, the Palestine Liberation Organization embassy. Or it was really an office, but they functioned as an embassy. So I think President Trump has been doing a great job in strengthening the relationship between the United States and Israel, which is important for both of our countries.
You're right about that. I mean, over the last 8 years under Barack Obama, it seemed they were strained, very strained, even that President Obama did the Iran nuclear deal, which was just, it still boggles my mind that they just gave him $150 billion all at once without having to prove anything, just by signing. But saying that, and I think our listeners know we've touched on those subjects of President Trump and what he's done for Israel that no other president would do, those two things. Now, tell me, is there anything else Donald Trump has done to help strengthen the relationship between the United States and Israel and what he's doing in the Middle East?
Certainly. Well, President Trump doesn't get credit for certain things. I just want to point out a couple of those things.
Okay.
Well, first of all, the media is always looking at President Trump's, things that he may have done in his past, his marital instability and things like that.
Correct.
But they do that without looking at the fact that we believe, and I'm a Jew. I'm a religious Jew who lives in Israel, and I believe very strongly that every single person sins on occasion, and some sin more than others, obviously. But we all make mistakes, and the Hebrew word for a sin is a chet, which means a mistake.
Okay.
And people make mistakes, and so he's made some mistakes in his life. And I'm sure he's the first. Well, I know he's the first to admit it. But at the same time, we also believe in redemption. We believe that people can repent and people can move forward and improve themselves. Now, I can tell you this. President Trump has done more to strengthen Judeo-Christian civilization than any other president in many years. And after the 8 years of Obama, when his allegiances and alliances seemed to lean much more in the direction of the Islamic world or the secular world, now there is a president in Washington who believes strongly in Judeo-Christian civilization and is taking steps to strengthen that.
Now, one of the things that I want to ask you about, David, because I know, of course, in the United States right now, and I know you are here seeing it, of course, the government was shut down over President Trump wanting to build a southern wall, a border on our border with Mexico. And I know everybody in America has heard about the wall in Israel that helped protect when there was so much terrorism going on. And that was what was it? There's two, but you said there's two border walls in Israel, and I wasn't sure about the southern wall in the country of Israel. Can you tell our listeners more about that?
Absolutely. There are two walls. I wouldn't really call them border walls because they're not both on actual borders of the country. But the first wall was built on the edge of Judea, the region of Judea and Samaria, which is the so-called West Bank. Obviously, we use the historical and biblical terms.
Yeah, but I'm glad you told our listeners that, because, I mean, we didn't get lost in that. But that's what we call the West Bank, or what most of the world calls the West Bank. That's the Judea, Samaria.
Correct.
Historical.
Now those are the historical mountain regions in central Israel. It's the biblical heartland of Israel.
Okay.
So those areas, that's where the Palestinian Authority is. A lot of the terrorism emanates from those areas. So Israel, after waves of terrorism in which there were major bus bombings and other terrorist attacks in the major Israeli cities, Israel decided to build a wall, to build a physical barrier that would protect the major cities. So they built this wall from concrete partially, and also from very strong steel with barbed wire and high-tech measures. And that physical barrier cut down on terrorism in Israel's major cities by 95%.
Wow. So, now, I mean, it was highly productive or useful. I mean, successful, I guess. That's what.
Very successful. And the other wall, which is actually, I guess people would call it a fence, because that other one is almost entirely from steel, and you can see through it, but it's very strong steel, and it's built in a very interesting way so that it's not easy to climb over. And there is also barbed wire and high-tech measures there, too. Well, why was that wall built? That wall is on the southern border between Egypt and Israel.
Okay.
And from 2010 to 2012, there were 55,000 illegal immigrants that came into Israel.
I didn't know. I didn't know Israel had that problem. I never had heard that they had illegal immigrants coming in, but they did.
Yes, absolutely. So after 2012, what happened was basically you're talking 55,000 illegal immigrants, and in a tiny country like Israel, about the size of New Jersey, that is a tremendous amount of illegal immigrants.
Oh, especially,
and they weren't coming in to do terrorism, but they were coming in as economic migrants, not so different from the ones south of the American border. And many of them were bringing in drugs and crime, and South Tel Aviv, where most of them settled, soon became a crime-infested area with rapes and murders and all kinds of terrible crimes. And the the people of Israel started to protest, and there were a lot of protests, and the pressure on the Israeli government to do something about it. So they decided to build a fence along that southern border. It's as I said, very strong physical barrier with high-tech measures included. In the year after it was completed, which was 2016, only 11 immigrants came in illegally. And in the year, and then the Israeli government raised the height by four feet, raised it up to 26 feet, and that was it. After that, not one immigrant came in 2017. Not one illegal immigrant succeeded in getting in.
Can you get that information to Nancy Pelosi and all the Democrats? Let them know how successful it's been.
Well, first of all, I've been trying to get it out there in the news, and I had the privilege of appearing on several shows. Obviously a lot of radio shows and Fox News and others, and I've been trying to get the word out. And so President Trump actually. Just on January 26th, and people can Google it if they wish, he tweeted about the wall, and so he included me in that particular tweet. There's a little video in which he flashes the Tucker Carlson interview in which I spoke about the wall, just as I've spoken about it now.
Well, great.
So Israel has 2 walls that work, and I'm happy to speak about it and explain the objective reality to everybody. And I suggest that Chuck and Nancy just take a deep breath and get off the politics and just concentrate on what works for American security.
Well, it may take an Israeli to tell the Americans how to...
Isn't that illegal? Isn't that amazing?
It's the illegal immigration problem. We love immigrants, but we want to know who's coming in, just like Israel does. So,
absolutely.
Well, you have really helped enlighten our listeners and me. I had never heard about the southern wall. I knew about the one, with the Judea Samaria wall, West Bank wall, but I had never heard about the southern wall of Egypt, and so that I hope we can take that, and maybe we can get some Democrats to listen to some common sense.
Well, that would be very good. And in my book Trump and the Jews, I wrote about some of the liberal Jews in America, including Chuck Schumer and people like him, who were just knee-jerk liberals, and they don't think. They don't think, and they don't look at the objective facts on the ground. So, I want to encourage Chuck Schumer, as well as Nancy Pelosi, even though she's not Jewish, to put the New York Times to the side, okay, because that's the liberal Bible that they worship, and just put it to the side and look to Israel and check out that Tucker Carlson interview, because that was also a good one. Maybe not as good as Doc Holliday, but it was a good one.
We take Tucker.
And let people really examine the facts, and then make an educated decision.
Well, one of the things, David, that I like about you give a lot of good common sense ideas. That is something that has always been, in America, the majority of our Jewish brothers and sisters across the country, the majority have always voted Democrat and seem to be liberal. Do you see anything on your trips to back into the United States? Do you notice there's any shift or movement, or people or more Jews thinking Trump may actually be helping build a relationship like he just mentioned between our two countries of Israel and the United States? Is that something that's the Jewish citizens in America, have they noticed anything like that, or are they still lockstep with Chuck Schumer and the Democrats?
Well, I'll tell you, Doc, the Jewish community is very complex.
Mm-hmm.
And in Trump and the Jews, I laid it out very clearly. And by the way, before I answer you, okay. I would just like to encourage people just to go to Amazon.com where they can find Trump and the Jews, and it. I think your listeners especially would really enjoy it.
No, I want to get the book. I sure do, and I'm glad. I was going to ask you where to get it. So just go to Amazon and type that in and look it up.
That's right. So to answer your question, the Jewish community in America is evolving in very interesting ways, and I don't want to give it all away here, but I'll tell you just very briefly. The majority of the Jewish community is becoming more and more secular, and they're just fading into the woodwork. They're all either not getting married or not having children, or not, or if they get married, they don't get married to other Jews. They just marry secular people, so they're just kind of fading away. The fastest growing group in the American Jewish community is the Orthodox, which basically is the religious Jews,
right?
Those who are more Jewishly identified, and those particular Jews vote for the GOP. They're more conservative socially. They're more conservative economically, and when it comes to Israel, they stand with Israel in a big way. So that's the trend, and the Orthodox Jewish community gets married young. They have big families. So that's the future of the Jewish community and Jewish world. And in Israel itself, also, Israel is becoming much more traditional, much more family-oriented. And when I talk about the family, I'm talking about the traditional family, a man and a woman getting married and having children.
Well, I'm glad you pointed that out, and I look forward to reading your book and where you have time to put out more of the complexities. But that is interesting because even looking at Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, and we just noticed after the last election, it seems like there's more and more Democrats are leaning toward a Palestinian side when you look at things of Israel, and it just seems to be. I'd wonder how long the liberal Jews will be able to put up with more and more of the ideology that's anti-Jewish. Yes,
well, first they have to understand that it's anti-Jewish, and that's it's part of reconnecting with their roots. And I'm hopeful that a lot of the American Jewish community as well, not just the Christians, and not just other Americans, but the American Jewish community will also read Trump and the Jews. And I think they'll find it enlightening and informative.
Well, David, thank you for writing that book. Thank you for being on Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics. And I know you're about to head back over to Israel, so I hope you have a safe trip, and hopefully we can stay in touch. And thank you so much for being on the show today.
Well, thank you, Doc. It was a pleasure.
Well, listeners, I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did, and because I learned so much. And David Rubin is an expert. He knows America. He knows Israel. He knows the evils in this world, and he knows that walls work. Get this, people, if you got friends who like Nancy Pelosi and believe that walls are immoral, believe walls don't work, and say, they keep saying the mantra, walls don't work, trying to believe in something. That's a myth. And get them this interview with David Rubin and tell them the truth. And thank goodness we got people like David Rubin, who's not even an American, but he wants to see America succeed and be strong and be able to protect its borders, and he wants America to learn what has worked in his country of Israel. Hey, that's Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics. Thank you for listening to us. We'll be back next week. We'll talk about the State of the Union address and see what happens in the world of rock splitting politics. See you then.
Thanks for joining us today, and remember to listen again next week for another edition of Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics. You can order Ed's new book, Bedrock Truths, by clicking on the book cover right in front of you on the screen, or visit DocHolliday.org. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next week.